Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of Heroes of the Heart, where we give voice to the message in your heart so you can create the life and the abundance and the impact that you desire to have. Our hero of the heart today is Janine Bolon. Welcome to the show, Janine. It's so
thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Excellent. I'm so glad to hear that. I want to share a little bit about Janine, and feel free to jump in at any time and to add or amend or whatever. I love what Janine shares. She has always loved figuring out how things work. A scientist from the beginning, she craved to dig into the mysteries of life and understand why things are the way they are. Kindred souls. After working in the pharmaceutical industry for 15 years, she dropped out of corporate America to homeschool her 4 children. She has always had a side business in her life and shares with other business owners and creatives how to manage a well-lived life of children, family, friends, and clients while not suffering from burnout. Well, that last sentence was enough to create a little bit of burnout by itself. Family, friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you manage it all?
Yeah, I'm frequently asked, they're like, Janine, oh my gosh, how do you do it all? And the answer is I don't do it all the time. And I think that's the thing. The other thing is I'm heavily scheduled. And please realize that a lot of people think that if you're heavily scheduled, or if you say, I have a very busy calendar, people feel a weight and they feel like, oh my gosh, I could never live that way. What they don't understand is I'm living my perfect life. I'm not living their perfect life, but I am living my perfect life because I have everything on a time blocked kind of system. And there's a lot of wonderful time management gurus out there, follow their systems, whatever. There weren't a lot of people out there. I learned mine from Hiram Smith back in the day when he was teaching. Wow. I always love talking to people like you, because you remember you would get the course on audio, cassette tapes, right? And you plug them into your car as you listen to them as you went to work. And so when I was working in the pharmaceutical industry, nobody really understood how to handle this time management for people. And they were just learning. And so Hiram Smith came out with the Franklin system, and it was based on what Benjamin Franklin had done. Well, then this Covey guy came along, right? Stephen Covey came along, and he and Hiram got together, and the next thing you know, it's the compass system. And now we have all kinds of time management systems. And I always share with people, do the one that works. Do the one. It took me 5 systems and $1,500 to find the right system for myself. Now that was over the period of 10 years. I just kept modifying and changing. And eventually I stopped doing it anybody's way but my own. And that was really the key. That's the key. So if you want the life that you dream about, you have to get control of your time. Everybody thinks, oh, you have to get control of your money. Oh, no. Your most precious resource, right, is your health and your time. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So a little bit that you might not know about me is I actually went to Brigham Young University.
Oh, and you know all about Hiram.
I do know all about Hiram and Stephen Covey and that whole zeitgeist. And when I was going there, Franklin Covey had not yet, it wasn't yet Franklin Covey.
Correct.
And, the Covey was no longer a professor at BYU, but his influence was still very much alive there while I was there, and honestly might still be much alive today. But I remember on my mission having a Franklin planner and going through the whole thing and and trying to figure out how do I balance my time and all that kind of thing. And while I have some really strong left brain skills, I also have a very strong right brain inclinations. It's where my heart leads me, is to doing those things that how do I be more expressive? How do I be more creative? How do I, do more art type of things? But there has to be that balance between the two sides, right? And I suspect, with the science background that you do, that you've also had to figure out, how do I balance these two sides? How do I create the happy medium that feeds all of me, not just part of me? Is that true?
Oh, most definitely. You hit the nail on the head. And the thing is I got rid of the word balance in my vocabulary. What I focus on is harmony, because balance, from entropy and enthalpy and all that wonderful stuff we had to learn, balance constantly requires energy, constantly requires adjustment. You're constantly engaged. And I don't know about you, but freedom to me is not living on autopilot. It's being able to fly where I want to fly. And so harmony is better, because if you have one person on, say, a stage speaking, that's fine. But if you have 10 people on stage speaking, it's garbage mess. And that's what happens to our brains when we're trying to balance things, right? However, if you have 10 people on stage singing, it's beauty. It's absolute beauty. And so I always use the word harmony. But that is a thing that we were taught, you and I. It was about, you were supposed to live a balanced life. Remember, you're supposed to live a balanced life. You're supposed to have a balanced diet. Everything was balanced. You heard the word balance all the time. Well, when I changed that word in my own head to harmony, I went into flow. It just, you can just feel it in your own body. You just move into flow, and you're not in the woo-woo space and, you know, and all that. And by the way, I am in the woo-woo space, but I just, I like to share with people, even as a analytical biochemist, which is my training, and automation and robotics and all that, circuitry, you know, that was all my training and background. Even with all that, I still knew the beauty of harmony, and I could move into that space of living a harmonious life. And that means what is in the highest good for all the people concerned. And because I had a lot of people at the time when I was first learning all of this, I was married to my college sweetheart. I was married to him for 30 years. We had 4 children together, and there was a lot happening in my world. And then I had, you know, my side business. Sometimes I'd have 2 side businesses going at the same time while homeschooling. And so there was a lot happening. And so when I picked that up on that, oh, this is the trigger word. And it was my own personal trigger word. Balance is causing me to be exhausted. But as soon as I moved into harmony, I relaxed. I could actually feel a relaxation response in my body. And so that's why I knew it was appropriate for me. And that's the one tip that if I can give anybody, I always tell them, if I hear the word balance a lot coming to me in their vocabulary, I'm like, hey, let me help you off that merry-go-round. And let's get to the fun part of life, shall we?
Yes, absolutely. You know, and I really relate to that. One, because I've always balance is such a loaded word, right? And what does it actually mean? Right. Coming from a finance background, you know, where balance sheet was, you know, kind of the preeminent document to determine how we're doing financially. There's a lot of weight there. But one of my core values is harmony. In fact, I have a whole day devoted to where my focus for the day is creating more harmony between myself, between what I'm doing, between me and my community, et cetera. That when we live in harmony with each other, when there is design principles that make things beautiful, then, you know, you can have an image that is 95%, you know, monotone, and one little element that is in contrast, and they're in harmony with each other. You know, they're not necessarily in balance the way that we tend to think about balance, but we don't need to have, and you know, you were talking about 10 people being on the stage singing. You know, you could have 10 people singing in harmony, you know, where they're all, you know, going together, but then there's also the time when one person breaks away and does a solo, and it's beautiful when it comes together. And there isn't necessarily, you know, not all 10 people have to have had the same amount of time on the stage and, you know, singing time, solo time, et cetera. But when we're in harmony, that we can do so much more than when we're out of harmony with ourselves, with our community, with our world.
I agree.
Thank you for that distinction. I will use that. So tell me about a time when you were out of harmony, when you were not having the fun that you were expecting to have. When did kind of all this begin, when you realized that you needed to find that harmony that you were seeking?
My mother died when I was very young. And so when my mother passed, and it was a long illness. She was a terminal cancer patient, and it was long before, it was in the early 80s. So it was long before we had the beautiful medical technology we do now. And I have seen such advancements. And I know a lot of people will bust on traditional medicine, but let me tell you something, the things that they do well is definitely trauma and acute injury, right? And so seeing how far they've come is a delight to me, but we weren't there yet. And so I had to watch my mother slowly die before my eyes. And I wanted answers. I wanted answers as to why a woman of her caliber, because she was a nurse and she had a lot of compassion. We nicknamed her Florence for Florence Nightingale. But this woman was just filled with compassion and for her community, for people. And she got into nursing because she didn't want to be a teacher, but she wanted to be in education. So she loved being able to educate people on how to have a healthier life. And so to watch this woman have to go through what she went through, I wanted answers. And so I started seeking God, and because I was raised Irish Catholic. And so, I wanted answers. And so I started studying the saints, and I really dug deep in this whole mystical side of things. And I wanted to literally, I became like Einstein, not in his acumen, but definitely in I wanted to know the mind of God. So what kind of God would allow this to happen? And so that's really started for me. I have to admit that, I was 16, 17, and I started seeking some answers. And I walked away from the Catholic faith when I turned 18. And I started really seriously seeking at that time. And it's been quite the adventure ever since. And one of the things that I've learned is that definitely enjoy the trip. I'm not saying that every moment of my existence has been joy-filled. Of course not. I'm a human being on planet Earth and stuff happens.
Yes.
But I've learned that beautiful Buddhist sort of mindset. So I've kind of taken eclectic bits. And so I love to tell people I'm highly spiritual, but I'm not religious because, I've kind of amalgamated, and I've run into a whole bunch of other people that are doing the very same thing, right? Like yourself, exactly, yourself included. Steve is a perfect example. But one of the things that I loved about the Buddhist mindset is there are 3 states that are optimal places for you to be. And that is in a state of acceptance. And that's usually where you find yourself when things are not going according to plan, right? They talk about you have enthusiasm as the highest state, then enjoyment, then acceptance. And that you really have those 3 levels, that's what you're always trying to work toward, because you can't always be enthusiastic. Even the most positive, most amazing people that I have run into, and there are quite a few in my world who are very upbeat, positive people, even they have their down moments. So you can't always live in enthusiasm. That's untenable, right? But you can live in enjoyment. Now, okay, so your true story. So your tire goes flat. You're on the side of a road and it's night and it's pouring down rain and there's lightning hitting nearby. Yes, all these things happen to me. It is very hard to be in enthusiasm. Ooh, let's go change the tire. It's very difficult to be in enjoyment. I'm soaking wet. It's cold. There's lightning. I am in fear. I'm holding metal objects. The scientist in me is going, this is stupid. But I can be in acceptance. And what does that do for me? It keeps me in a state of calm and rational thinking, even though my emotions are all over the map at that point. But I can accept the fact that this is where I am. And by doing that, I no longer, and what is the purpose of all this? As the Buddhists say, is to keep you from suffering, and it's to keep you from causing suffering in others. My kids were in the car. So they're like, what are you going to do, Mom? I'm like, I'm going to change the tire. And they're like, should we get out? No, normally, safety wise, you would totally let your children out. Well, I had to weigh the safety factors in that moment. Lightning and rain, or, you're supposed to have your kids out of the car before you lift the jack, right? So I did everything I could to keep the car balanced, and I was doing a lot of praying, like, don't let anything happen to my kids. But, you have to make choices at that point. So did I make the most optimal choices? I think I did, considering my circumstances. My children all have grown to adulthood.
Bravo.
Right? Yay. And things could have gone horribly wrong, and it wouldn't be, and it's good a story. But I feel because I was focused on accepting the situation. This is where I am. This is what I have. Oh, and by the way, it was before cell service. It wasn't like I could pick up a cell phone and call AAA. Okay. I was on a road by myself, right? So you have to make choices. And so the Buddhists help us with suffering. Are we going to cause more suffering for ourselves and those around us? Are we going to sit there and just wail at the universe demanding that something? So those are some of the things that I learned. I watched my mother go through an incredible condition, and I watched how she handled that with such grace. And I, having more resources to me than she could have ever imagined during her lifetime, have pulled from all of the best resources I can find and use those gold nuggets to help drive my life. So to go around to the beginning and wrap up with the question that you said, when did this start? It started when I was very young, probably 13, 14 is when my mom first started showing signs of the condition. And by the time she was 16, 17, I knew she was then terminal, and I had to come to grips with that.
That is so huge. And a couple of thoughts that came to mind for me was my own tire changing experience. And I think it was Eastern Colorado, desert, 4 a.m., cars zooming by. And fortunately, there was no lightning, but still we were, I don't know how many miles, but there was not a town in sight, let alone nearby. And, how do we change this? And I think they're actually in the process of moving. We're either on vacation going from one side of the country to the other, because my wife and I grew up on opposite sides of the country. But it's in that state, it's like, you can, in my less noble times, I would probably be throwing the car jack and letting a few choice words go, or I can just accept, okay, it's 4 a.m. I have to change the tire and I don't really want to do this. I can either fight it or I can just accept it and let it be. And when we accept, when we just stop and pause and be in the moment, then we can make it a conscious choice that takes us in the direction that we want to go, rather than being in reaction to what's happening, responding appropriately to what's happening in our lives.
And what's amazing to me is my children have no memory of the incident. That's what's amazing to me. And I think it's because I was in acceptance. I was doing a lot of deep breathing. And when I was outside the car being poured upon, I was using those choice, metaphoric words to, definitely those were coming out of my mouth. But I was also leaning on the back of the car while I was doing that. And I was also calming myself. So, like I said, my emotions were all over the map. But at the same time, I knew I could make this hard or I could make this easy. And it was like, I chose easy, and easy was acceptance. And we weren't taught that. You and I had to learn that. And what I love about some of the young people that are coming into my courses and stuff like that is that they are so aware of the power that they have in the moment. Some people call it the power of now with Eckhart Tolle, but it's like, they're so aware of that all you have to do as a guide, because I don't consider myself a teacher to them, but all you have to do as a guide is just remind them, hey, remember your power's in your moment. And you can see them breathe. You'll see them start a breathing technique and all that. And I'm just like, wow, that is just something that we didn't even have access to when you and I were growing up.
Not at all. Yeah.
Right. And that's what I love about where we are now as a culture. Yeah.
Yes, that's beautiful. And how do we use the power of the moment to create the joy, the fun, the laughter, the love that we want to be bringing into the world? We kind of had to find that ourselves, right? I know I've been on many long journeys in my life, both literal road-based ones, but also kind of the more spiritual, emotional, etc. type ones, and finding those pieces that help me to get to a better place. How do we continue that journey in order to be the voice, be the messenger, be the guide for those who are following behind or beside us.
I think we need to start with, if from today forward, anybody that you meet, celebrate the fact that you're still alive together. We made it through an epidemic, a global epidemic, one of such far reaching implications. We're still finding our footing after that, but we survived. And so I think that alone, I do that with people on Zoom. I did that with you today. I was just like, hey, it's so great to see you, Steve. I mean, 2020, that was something, wasn't it? Because that is our particular generations and the generations that experience that. We have kids that will have no idea what it means to have a prom or to have gone through high school and had a graduation. There are people who had major life-changing events occur during that period of time with no celebration, because we were having to do it online. Or if they did have celebration, it was, through Zoom. I mean, one of my favorite pictures I can remember taking for our Christmas postcard that year was I had 3 of my children at home, and I had one child who was in lockdown at their particular college due to what was happening there. And so we took the Christmas photo with that my son sitting there on Zoom, and one person's holding the laptop, because that is the best we could do. So that's where you bring the joy. Is like, we teasingly said that Matthias was the genie in the bottle at that. and Matthias, who was the genie in the bottle, because awesome. Matthias couldn't make it home. So those are things that celebrate the fact that you're still alive, and don't take it for granted. And you hear that a lot. And I don't mean that in that kind of patronizing way. I mean, celebrate the fact that if you've ever been ill, you know how wonderful it is to be able to move all 10 digits. You know how wonderful it is to be able to do big arm circles. If you've ever had surgery where you were unable to move certain things because of stitches, think about the fact that you now have range of motion.
Yes.
I mean, these are simple little things, but at the same time, I find great enjoyment out of them, because they're elements that are within my control, and they're elements that I'm experiencing in that now. And the fact that I'm able to go and make myself a cup of coffee, and I'm able to have a hot shower, these are all things that I don't take for granted, because there were parts of my life where my dad was in the military, and there were certain stations that, as a family, that we were located on, where hot water wasn't necessarily a given. Electricity was optional. We were in places that were remote. And so I learned that water is quite heavy. And the fact that I have it delivered to my home through pipes is a delight. Anyone who's ever had to carry water loves American water, loves the United States, because we have some of the best water on planet. Now, I know people like to tell us that we don't, but relative to where I have been, yes. People are always like, Janine, you're going to drink that right out of the tap? I'm like, yeah, best water on planet right here. People don't understand. I've been in places where you could actually taste the salt of the sea in the water because of the filtration systems that were being used. Of course, we boiled everything, but still, you had salty water. So those are just a few things that I love to celebrate. And people are like, oh my gosh, Janine, that's so basic. And I'm like, yeah, but it's those basics that make for the joy, the fact that I didn't have to carry the water. Steve, I cannot tell you how exciting it is for me each morning to fill a glass full of water. And no, I didn't have to carry that 5-gallon jug.
Yeah, I totally relate. And honestly,
yes,
I'm thinking about my wilderness survival or my Boy Scout days.
Right.
I had to, carry the 5-gallon bucket from one side of camp to the other. And granted, there are plenty of people in the world that have to carry it much further than I did. But carrying a 5-gallon bucket, it's heavy to begin with. It gets heavier at every step you take.
Yep. And anyone who's ever had to carry water totally understands what I'm talking about. So every time we pour water out of a tap, that is a moment where I'm just like, and so that's how we can use these tools, right? How do we bring more fun? How do we bring more joy into our life? And the way you do it is just by appreciating where you are. Whenever I look at where I was versus where I am now, I am so grateful where I am now, because I have a lot of stuff I could I could bring to the forefront that was negative, but I think about just the progress I've made as a person, just as an individual, how much more that I know now. But if I compare myself to my future self, that's where misery is. That's where a lot of suffering can come. I have a vision board, I have a 5-year plan and all that, and I set goals. Don't think I don't do that. I'm very much engaged in that. However, I don't compare my now self to my future self, because I know my future self has got a lot more together than I do right now in this moment. However, right now in this moment is the most powerful I am. And Eckhart Tolle talks about that over and over again, about how your real power is in your now. And a lot of our spiritual teachers actually talk about that. So anytime I find myself in suffering, or I'm stressed, or I'm nervous, or any negative emotion that is not serving me, I always move back to the now. And of course, what's that key? Oh, it's right back to that breathing. We're breathing. People tell you all the time, breathe, breathe. And what is the reason? It's to bring you back into your body, get you out of your head, get you out of that neurosis of fear, anxiety, stress, get you back into the body. And then you can just go, okay, I can move my 10 fingers and blah, blah, blah. And for a highly analytical person, this is all stupid, because I am in anxiety right now, and it's not solving the problem, expletive. And I want the problem solved, expletive, with an exclamation point. And you're not helping me by telling me to breathe. And that's when you say, you will not, and this is where you can bring in Einstein for that analytical person. And you can say, hey, the problem that you're experiencing right now will not be solved with you being in that mindset. And Einstein said so.
Yeah. Exactly.
So breathe, calm your little self down, and then we might be able to see and receive a solution, right? Absolutely. I just love that.
I do too. And I love Einstein in the way that he used and integrated both sides, the logic and the scientific, but also the imagination. That his greatest contributions came not because he, did all the math and, figured it all out. Not that he didn't do that, but it was in those moments of dreaming and imagining, and like, what if, or what if we looked at it this way instead of looking at it this way? And in order to do that, you have to have the consciousness to be able to use the tools that we have available to us. As you were talking about breathing, and I was making the analogy of, it's great that we can turn on the faucet and get the water coming out. But it's totally amazing to me that we don't even have to turn on the faucet in order to get the oxygen that we need. That we don't have to go around with a mask on our face. And I've had 4 premature kids, so I've had lots of oxygen tanks in my house, and especially in the early years. That's something we take totally for granted. But it's also something that is such a rich supply for us, that there are these resources, there's these opportunities, there's these such an incredible amount of abundance around us, that if we don't stop and appreciate those, we totally miss and overlook the abundance that we do enjoy.
It all comes back to that suffering, right? And stress. And I'd like to, we were talking about the difference between balance and harmony. And I like to talk about motivation versus inspiration, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Most of the world is set up, by no fault of anyone's, just the way it has defaulted, into motivating you, right? Into getting you to do something. And then there is some sort of fear factor that is held out to you. Like, if you don't do this, blah, blah. Now realize most of the time that's overused. And it's overused by marketing agencies and stuff, because, they know that fear definitely will help motivate you. What Steve and I are talking about is a life of inspiration, living through inspired action is what some people call it. For those that follow the law of attraction and that kind of thing, they talk a lot about the difference between motivation and inspiration. I found out about it literally by accident. But it's one of those things that the more somebody tried to motivate me, the more I realized I was giving serious pushback because they couldn't know what was in my highest and best good because only I was living in my shoes. And they could make references or ideas, or they could teach me what worked for them, which I was very grateful for, because, a lot of times they could take huge boulders out of my path. But when it came to the actual walking, I was the one that was going to have to walk the path. And so it was really up to me. And when you really start understanding that your most powerful point is in the moment, but then also the choices that you make are only going to really matter to you. Now, as parents, you and I have children that we also bring into our equation. But most of the time, it's like what is really good for us will be good for the children that we're considering as well. Because if we're in a state of celebration and joy and not as stressful, the better. So one of the things I've learned in America is this need to be productive. If you're not doing something productive, then what are you doing? Is it of value? And that comes from that very deep Puritan ethos that founded our nation for most of us. Okay. And so one of the things that I've loved working with the First Nations or the Native American population has been productivity is only necessary during certain seasons. And that's that agrarian mindset. And so realize if you're a hunter-gatherer, you're going to have very different methods than if you're an agrarian-based personality. And so when you find yourself very uncomfortable and stressed out and you don't really know what to do, sometimes it helps to figure out what season is it? Well, it's spring. It's where things are rejuvenating, things are refreshing, renewal, all those words, right? But if you're in summer, that's high activity. Yeah, that's a good time to be productive. That's a good time to be action oriented and all that. And then as we come into fall, it's a time to reassess and reevaluate. And then as you hit winter, one of the things I learned from the Native Americans was that's what they call winter teachings. There's whole months where they're not working. They're with the tribe and they're learning and teaching each other. And so winter teachings are big. So I just like to sometimes point out balance versus harmony. The other one is motivation versus inspiration. Okay, are you being motivated into action? Or are you being inspired into action? And then the last one is, are you suffering? Or are you having fun? Believe it or not, we actually came on this planet to have more fun. And if you're not having fun, guess who's the person who can fix it? Thank God you can fix it. Why? Because you're the most powerful person on planet to bring more fun into your life. No one else can do it for you. Only you can do it. Thank God.
Absolutely. And having dealt with severe depression, one of the, and it was honestly kind of like winter, and honestly the winter season was a major teacher for me in coming and dealing with that state, in that we might look at things as being dead or dormant or whatever, but that doesn't mean that there isn't stuff going on kind of underneath the surface, that there is an awful lot going on, and that we have the opportunity to turn our darkest days into our brightest days. That all we have to do is just keep going and following that inspired action to get to where it was that we want to go. When I was in that depressed state, my mantra, my North Star was joy. And even though I wasn't experiencing it at the time, by holding on to that and continuing to follow that, even in kind of the winter stages of my life, I was able to get to that point where I do experience joy. That I've been called, Mr. Positivity by some people, which is so ironic because I used to be like the most depressed, angry, down person you could ever meet. But we can change our state. We don't have to keep being in the state that isn't serving us. And we are, like you were just saying, we are totally in control of that. We are the masters of our story, the architects of our lives.
Yep. And that architecture is, if you're not happy with where you are right now, and if you're not in a good place, then start asking yourself some very basic questions, because the basic questions are usually the hardest to answer, but they are so worth the time to answer them. And the first one is, what do I want to do? Like, what is it? If you're in a depressed state, and we've all experienced it, I have, when you're in a depressed state, that's usually not the best time to be making life-altering decisions unless they help you feel better. And you know the cycle. So you get to feeling better, you get angry. And then when you get angry, you feel better. And then people tell you, no, don't be angry. And so you go back to being depressed, and you get into that vicious cycle of anger, depression, anger. But eventually, then you come up to blame. You start blaming people. And then all of a sudden you start feeling better. For me, it actually makes me laugh, because I know I'm in control of my own destiny. But if I start blaming other people, it gets me laughing, because it's so ludicrous. It's so ridiculously stupid, but it makes me laugh, right? And so that's why I'll start blaming people. You know whose fault this is? And then just I'll list something ridiculous, and it gets me out of my own trauma and drama that my brain has me in, right?
Absolutely.
And so, but ask yourself, what do I want to do? And the other one is, what do I want to learn? What do I want to give? What do I want to have? And the fifth one is usually the most difficult one. So I always save it for last. I answer the others first. But what do I want to be? You know, and when you start asking yourself these questions, and this is my default, is when I'm really confused, I do not have clarity, I'm a muddled mess. And believe it or not, that's a highly spiritual state. I had a guru once say that to me, is that the more confused you are, the more open you are to receiving inspiration.
Yes.
So you're willing, you're open, because you don't know what to do. So he said it's actually a very highly spiritual state. So the point is, don't be in it all the time, and start asking for clarity, because you do want to move forward in your life. But one of my favorite things is, when I'm all that confused, is I'll answer those 5 questions, well, what do I want to do? A lot of times they'll be like, I have no idea, because I'm so confused. I have no idea. Okay, well, what do you want to learn? And then I'll default back, because you and I are both scholars, well, we'll be learning to the day we die, Steve. You and I both know that.
Absolutely.
So, what do I want to learn? Okay. And then what do I want to have? Well, I want to have peace of mind. It's funny. Whenever I say, what do I want to have? It's almost never material. I'm usually seeking something else. And then, what do I want to give? Well, that's very easy for me. And then what do I want to be? And then it kind of settles into place for me. So those are 5 questions that I use to kind of get myself into a better place.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you've done a number of podcasts. You've written, you had told me earlier that you're writing your 12th book this year. So you put a lot of content out into the world, and not only your own podcast, but you've also helped other podcasters get their content out there. How is that? I guess maybe the easiest way for me to ask that is why?
Because I didn't speak unless spoken to for so long.
Wow, do I resonate with that?
And then there comes a point in your life where you get tapped, and you can't explain it. You know what I'm talking about, though. You've totally had the experience where you know that if you don't start sharing what you know, you will die. That's what it feels like. I know it may sound like I'm being overly dramatic. I am not. I knew that if I didn't start changing the way I lived and expressing the content that was rattling around in my brain case, if I didn't start doing that I would get a condition that would cause me to die. I knew that from, as they say, down to my bones.
Yes,
I knew that to my bones. And so I have been, for the past 7 years, I have been a content machine. I have run 85 online courses. I have produced 4 different podcast shows just of my own content. We got syndicated, and so we consolidated them all. So I've had over 300 episodes just of my own content. And now I have a production company and we help others broadcast their message. So like, that's why you and I were a perfect fit, Steve. You were like heroes of the heart, you know, people that are out there producing and helping get their message out there. And I'm like, I understand that totally. So thank you for doing what you do, because we've been called to this. It's not like we picked it for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and while you were talking about, you know, the feeling like you're going to die, and my depression was a state that I was literally 5 minutes away from dying. What I realize is that there's depression, kind of the winter states of our lives, but there's also expression. And one of the ways that we transform the depressed states, you know, the valleys in our lives, into the mountains or the vistas of our lives is through expression, you know, and that expression can take lots of different forms. You know, it can take writing books, creating podcasts, doing artwork, you know, having conversations with people. But we are here not just to receive, and as the scholars that we are, I read a ton of books, and, you know, and you know, love that. And like you said, I will be doing that until the day I die. Just as my parents did, honestly, that we're not just to receive and to kind of consume, but we're also here to express and to deliver and to share what we have been given with others, so that they can also benefit and grow and continue the cycle. And I think it's just such an incredible experience that when we free our voice, when we open up our throat chakra, you know, when we open up to expressing and allowing ourselves to show up in the world, that not only are we doing that for ourselves, but we're also doing it for all those others out there who either are constricted themselves or that are listening for what it is that we might have to share with them. And for us to create that joyous, fun-filled, celebratory life and world, you know, we need to be out there engaged in doing that work. So thank you for all that you are doing.
Oh, yes, definitely. And it's one of the reasons that I wrote the Divine series. It started off with Seeking the Divine. The second book was Finding the Divine. But the third book was right in alignment with what you just said, which was Expressing the Divine. And that book was the one that really made me happy when I enjoy writing all my books, but that one was like, I felt so thrilled that I'd finally written enough that I got to Expressing the Divine, because that was the call to others that if you're listening to something like this, then I don't care who you go to learn from. Find a teacher, find somebody that resonates with you. But if you have no one, then definitely go to Expressing the Divine and just read the book and do the basic steps, and you will start to see how you can totally express what you know between your ears. And it is of value, because there's somebody there that needs what you have. And if you're not expressing it, then they're not going to learn from you. And believe it or not, they need to learn from you. And you may not consider yourself a teacher, but you are. And they need to learn from the mistakes that we call mistakes, but they need to learn from the experiences that you've had and the choices that you made. And that way you can help ease their path, because their challenges are going to be so different from yours. And why should they have to walk down the same path you did?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Janine,
Oh.
for sharing your heart and being a hero of the heart today.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions as we conclude. And the first question is, what is your heart calling you to today?
My heart today is calling me to my backyard, where I will be redesigning and replanning. I have somebody who's coming over, and I cannot tell you how excited I am. I've been looking forward to this podcast. And then right after that, I get to go into my backyard, and it's been under snow for so long. It's a delight to see grass. So yeah, that's what my heart's calling me to today.
That's beautiful. And the last question is, for our audience, how can they continue the conversation with you? How can they connect with you?
Okay. The easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn and to go to Janine Bolon, and it's Janine, and the last name's B as in boy, Bolon. Go to Janine Bolon, and one member of my team, I have a production company. So one member of my team will see that you want to be a friend to me on Facebook or LinkedIn, and they will say yes. And then you will start to receive, this is how you can get a hold of me for a 15-minute Zoom call, because I'd rather hear from you. I'm a total geek. I love talking to people on Zoom. So yeah, that's how you can reach. That's the easiest way to contact me.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Janine.
Thank you for the ability to be with you today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. So for our audience, until our stories meet again, be the bright light in someone's